This is an introductory video to what is possibly a very likely very long video or series of videos. It's almost like a disclaimer for what it is, simply because all this content that I'm going to talk about is really big. I'm going to talk about Mixed Masters, the original Warrior's Treasure, all the way up to now. The original novel I wrote that I didn't finish, but I wrote several, and they're all very close to done, and then a few others in clumps. They're about a bunch of stuff that I was coming up with at the time until I was about 13, and then I had a bunch of cool like dreams and whatever, and then came up with a bunch of stuff following that. And from when I was 13 to 15, I stopped writing it. When I was 16, I wrote a big novel and came up with the bulk of everything else, which is from the 2003 to 2006 time period. And sure enough, 15 years later, I'm now 30, and we're working on the exact same stuff. I'll probably bring Anthony in for a few of these videos because obviously we've been working on Lantern Valley. Mixed Masters and Warrior's Treasure is a part of Lantern Valley, so he's fairly familiar with some of it, and it'll help me figure out how to talk about it too. It's easier to discuss things with someone than just like rant about this stuff, and it'll remind me of what I need to cover or what I haven't said and have said. So yeah, this is a bunch of stuff that another part of the disclaimer is it's going to be very confusing for a long time, and if you look at the way a lot of stuff works, it's almost like the way they say it in A Man from Earth, cool movie, go check it out, is how he was only as smart as the time period he was in. So like if the sun sets in the west and he knows that or whatever it is for a long time until they make compasses and all this other stuff, and it slowly evolves, and then there's more sciences and more, like he starts studying chemistry. The concept of chemistry wasn't around when he was a caveman, whatever it is. Spoilers, he's a guy that lives forever or whatever according to the story, and over time he's learning how all these things work. So it's like, oh, psychology doesn't exist, and so he doesn't have a degree in that, but he has a degree in chemistry, but it's from like 200 years ago, so it's all outdated and all this stuff. And that's the way it was with Warrior's Treasure and Mixed Masters and all this stuff that I invented growing up, where I always described science, like for a long time since I was very little, that it's always in a state of catching up to what we already know. Because it would be things like we learn something, it's like, that's cool, and then we test to see how it works, etc., and then it all makes sense. It's like, yeah, okay, figure something like that, whatever it is. So all these things that we don't know yet, eventually we do know. And it's almost like I'll be dipping into things that are and this will be constantly evolving too, just the way I talk about it. Even from here, in like 10 years from now, I'll be talking about it differently because we'll know different things, or like I'll have learned different things. So like I'll be talking about, even right away, looking at the very first thing I was going to discuss is the almost the connections of like Buddha and quantum physics. And like I could not have known that stuff or had a way of talking about it when I was 15 without even knowing what I had no idea what meditation was. I had no idea how physics worked at all, so it just wasn't in my framework of like how I could actually explain or look at this stuff that I was already coming up with. So over time, when I turned 16 and I stopped writing, I was like, I can't do this right now because I don't have the context necessary. And over 15 years, it has developed more and more into being what it is now. So yeah, this is ever-evolving thing that's going to be really complicated, and I'm going to talk about really tricky things. This is going to be an introduction video to what this stuff is and the place I'm coming from when I end up discussing any of these whatevers. And what they are is it's a world that involves 30 other worlds that are interwoven into our story. And each of these worlds is so incredibly awesome and complex and interwoven and unique within itself that there's nothing else in the world of storytelling today yet that is even close to any of these 30 worlds. So it'd be awesome if somebody could take one of these even and like just do something with it, because there's infinite possibility. And each of these 30 is just like one possibility of these concepts that has been fleshed out into a full world. And yeah, I'm going to talk about those because these are the ones that we're using in our massive stories. So, this is I thought the only printed copy of the very original Warrior's Treasure that I wrote when I was like 13 to 16 years old. But turns out I had multiple printed copies. But turns out none of the pages are in order at all. It's just a mess. So I was going to look for the prologue, which is the very first thing I ever wrote for this story. No, I'm not going to bother because it would be really difficult to find at the moment. But the first thing that I wanted to write when I was like 14 or something was first thing I wanted to get right, not just write, but actually like figure out, was how to write the initial part of the story, which is a creature called the Tips coming into being. I did it well, and it was a good prologue, and I still have a prologue today, and I still like it. And that's the reason I continued writing the story as long as I did, and came up with as much stuff as I did. To go right into it. So, Tips. Just kind of have to explain this with multiple things, probably. One of the ideas is something we know as part of like human knowledge now, at least on like some main fronts of science, is how we get a lot of things backwards. Like, we know that my heartbeat affects things in a however many meter radius away from us. So like every person's heartbeat is affecting the world around them to some degree, somehow. Which obviously that just means that's all we figured out so far, but every single heartbeat actually affects absolutely everything, every single heartbeat, like all the time. To what degree, we don't know, to like, etc. But we do know that it does that. There's like just duh at this point. And one day it's some kind of contextual piece. Eventually we'll look into it and figure it out. And a lot of the story is kind of that thing for me, where it's like at some point I start to understand that more, and then it's like, yes, this makes sense, and that makes sense, and this is why that works, etc. The Tips, that's one of the ideas that when I was really young I couldn't really figure out, and now I have this framework to describe it. The other is the concept of, I guess, higher planes or other realms of existence. One of the parts that was really difficult for a long time with Tips, and Tips specifically, is the quirk of how they're almost like a trick or like a joke, like it's backwards from what you would think. They're multi-dimensional, super powerful, beyond anything on the physical realm beings that have limited themselves down to be like a body of mind and matter, etc. And for the most part, it sounds like, yeah, they're like godly beings and whatever, which they are. But it's different. And it's no different from the standard way that we perceive things like higher dimensional beings, angelic realms, whatever, celestial planes, all this stuff. They're all exactly the same, but there's components missing. Or it's kind of like that thing where at some point we didn't know how stuff works, so we can't come up with certain things, and then they kind of stick, and they're anomalies that take off, and then that's the way we perceive them all the time. It's almost like, angels, just higher dimensional things, but if you say angel, then there's this specific particular image or something in mind, that and what they stand for or anything like that. It might be associated with some, like, as if they're like, I don't know, all powerful, heroic, good creatures, something like that. Which isn't wrong, like it's not inaccurate to what that would be or how it would work or anything like that. But it's like that humanization part of it that we throw onto everything that we think of, or like that we understand, and it's like, it's human, so it must be like this. Like it works the other way too. You see a dog in a show, and then it smells like food, and it's like, oh, food. It's like, that's not how it would work at all. But we can relate to it when we humanize it to ridiculous extents. So it's kind of like that, where the Tips are just that same idea, but not humanized. Godly beings, but you get rid of the extreme humanization part of like making them the way they are, and then you take that other part of it, of the like that heartbeat thing. It's the same with like you hear shamanistic practices or channelers or anything. Example like be the sun. Like you can talk about the sun the same way, where we see this ball of fire in the sky and we think all this energy is coming from there. But if you actually look at how it works, like what's going on is, if you feel heat from the sun and see the sun, and like it, so light from the sun, it's not like it's stuff that's coming from the sun. Like that photon or whatever it is that's interacting with your sense door, you feel it right there, like right there and there at that moment. It is in contact with you. It's a part of you. It is not something that is coming from one place to another. You exist as it. Like technically, that is what's happening. Like by definition, that is what's taking place. Is you are the sun, and that's that by definition, by technicality, would be the part of the sun. Like everything's the sun. The heartbeat affects everything, and then this is the densest, dullest part of my material form. The sun is the same way. All of this stuff, like you, me, everything is the sun, and then the sun is just the densest, dullest, the part of the sun, the part of that energy that is literally everything that it could ever contact in. It's not like, we can measure photon leaving the sun and going somewhere else, but that's just the way we measure it in our little weird, like with our gizmos and stuff. That's not actually what's taking place. It's the photon is somewhere and it exists as part of the sun. Like you can't say it's separate from it simply because it's moving away. It's like, that's just not how it works. And as energy, like as a ball of energy, if you're feeling the sun at all, you're feeling the energy of the sun, not something that came from the sun, but of it. It is part of it. It is like an existence that coincides with the existence of the sun at the exact same time that they both are there. And eventually we figure out that that is the case. And the sun, that ball of fire that you see in the sky, it is simply the dull part that has solidified itself to such an extent that our sense doors that operate on this really tiny frequency and within this framework of this physical body are actually able to pick up some part of it that isn't in the air, but like some part of it, like this core, this really dense section it's so dull and dense and slowed down energetically that it has materialized itself as something. And then we see light rays coming off of it, solar flares coming off of it, and beams or whatever. And we're like, yeah, it's coming from the sun. It's like, no, it's backwards. So yeah, we figure it out eventually. So like, there's those two really trippy ideas. Throw like whatever it is, super dimensional, crazy, powerful being things, and just the way we perceive everything is there's everything, and then it goes back. It's almost like the universe experiencing itself through you, and all this other spiritually stuff is like, it's not you experiencing life and going through life and whatever. It's there's the universe, there's you exist, part of it, etc. You are the universe. Technically, that is the case. You are the universe, and that's a technicality. That is a fact. That's not. It's like a really basic fundamental thing you learn in elementary school physics. It's not like some spiritual esoteric thing. It's like if my hand is a part of me, my hand is me. It's not like it's some disassociated thing that came from me. And it's like, yeah, there's a hand coming out of me. It's like, no, my hand is me too. Like my mind is me too. My toe, like all this stuff. It is you. It's not like a part of you implies it is you. If you are part of the universe, which we are, because if you exist, then you are the universe. Like that is the case. So that whole kind of flip side to it, mixed with the concept of godly realms, you get something like tips. So tips, I haven't even talked about what they are or anything. They end up kind of looking like birds in a way, bird-ish creatures, humanoid-ish maybe, but not necessarily all the time. But that's another part that I was gonna that I used to think about all the time is the idea of angels and things having wings, and I'll get to that. But tips have wings, or more, it's like if you were to solidify something down, like the sun again too, but there was something that like just all this energy, and it needed to solidify itself into a material physical body. It would have some kind of thing that we would see that we would interpret as something like a array of feathers or whatever. It's not too unlike fur, which is another world to get to, but they have cosmic consciousness, etc., whatever, and they trick the system, cheat the system by using magic to manipulate that into being some kind of elemental physical form that has qualities to it on a physical plane. So the tips are somewhat related to fur that way. Another one they're related to is like babu. And the fur will have feathers, like lots of little feathers, but those are they're not actually feathers. They're magical cosmic energy flowing into them, and they end up looking like feathers because it's constantly this material that they're interacting with and living among. Tips, they're just bigger arrays, like thick streams coming off that look more like wings rather than like constant perpetuated feathers all over them, because they don't have that. The fur are like monkey things, and they have those just because of the way they operate. Another one was babu, very connected to babu in the sense that like babu, they are an example of a babu is Vound, who actually is part of the Palsinet world, but Vound is a giant babu. Like if you were to look at all of the Earth, it's about the size of the Americas, and the rest of the land on this island where the Palsinet live is Vound, and it's this old, ancient, perished and petrified structure made of a kind of like hippo, dragon, frog creature that shaped the planet, and but also shaped the cosmos, and punctured a hole when it perished into the cosmic stream, so more ways that life can exist in this world. And one of them, Palsinet, which how Palsinet evolved over time is actually a pretty good example of just how this stuff changes. Is they were originally Malguit was the only Palsinet that I knew of, and there's like a few others like Resitan and stuff who are just like thermalies, which meant creatures that just live in extreme conditions. And this Malguit creature was kind of like a lava beast, and lived in Vound on this island, was the only one there, but kind of branched off into many Malguits, but it was all kind of cosmic-y, so very kind of trippy, like they kind of existed and they kind of didn't, and it was all like the weird cosmic mental trick, almost like just a really extreme like hallucinogen or something that was actually real to the people who interacted with it. So it's like it was tripping out, but you would see the trip, and like this is what this volcano looked like, as like living magma in this hyperthermalic state. And Malguit eventually was like, to humanize it a bit, it's like, okay, they're kind of like multi-legged things, so like centaurs, but they have like this feline type of feel to them. So it's like lava cat centaurs, and now Palsinet, that's the way me and Anthony describe them now, is lava cat centaurs, kind of tiger centaurs. And then it like that would slowly evolve, and it's like, but then there's all this lava that's really like trippy and stuff, and then it's like, what if there's rocks and we threw it by some people, and it's like, how would they just like almost do these rocks like a drug or something and all this trippy stuff? But then it's more like there's all this sap around them, so they use these sap to terraform the land, because like that's what they do, is they use the babu's kind of whatever thing, and like it's almost like within their incarnation to be like, yes, we will terraform as well. So they like terraform the land and terraform the earth and their minds using the subconscious with all the sap, and then they like do these kind of ritualistic, whatever shamanistic things that were brought in there, so that it would be more like they're like doing these things to deliberately bring out their conscious demon stuff, and like deal with all these weird things, just that type of world. So the tips can be heavily involved in that, because like they can associate with that a lot easier than most of the other worlds. And right back to tips. So yeah, the trick with the tips is angelic beings, and just like this is not really some like stuff that I directly come up with myself. It's stuff that exists, like it's real, and then I just gave it like a face and a name a certain way. Like, you know, the concept of God or other dimensional beings, they can be so real. They probably are, and you know, we won't know until eventually we do know, and we've developed or evolved or whatever enough to know for sure. But you can pretty much guarantee that there is some kind of being that is not human, that is really evolved, that is energetically whatever, and people have given them a name and a face and called it angels or whatever. And then people like Jared Token come around and like just rename basically angels as elves, because the elves he interpreted that the rest of the world knows now are just like angels with a different name. It's like, let's make them run around in a forest, they're more angelic-y humans or whatever, yeah, let's call them elves instead. Like, just who needs the leprechauns and like small whatever elves like the past. Like it's just a name and a face for a more angelic being that comes from like a plane that is kind of beyond humans and whatever, and you could call it graceful or something, but it's more like just this essence or energy about them is different. So like it's a name and a face and whatever, and I'm just taking that same thing, just like this thing that exists. There's beings from other planes that we can't fathom, and come to this plane of existence, and then that's what they look like. Like they just look like something. So I just gave them a face and a name, and I call them Tips, and they're like Tips, the world of Tips instead of the world of angels and whatever else. So like that's it. It's not like, I've come up with a name and the culture and like all this stuff about them. I haven't even gotten into anything about like what tips do or how they are or anything. But like this is stuff that's real, and that's part of the reason that like all these stories, like we have 30 worlds, and they all are very much just based in reality, but given a face and a name in a world by me and with Anthony as well, and like creating these things. But it's really like you could take these in infinite directions, quite literally infinite different ways, and come up with like literally infinite stories. Like human storytelling today has not even tapped anywhere close to the amount of potential that is in any of these things. And like for the most part, most of these worlds and stories, there's no story in like shows or movies or writing or anything or games or whatever that exists today. No storytelling medium at all, or even conceptual like world setting that is even, it's not even on the radar of modern media yet. Like maybe in before me and Anthony will like finish these, something will crop up, but I doubt it. Like it's not even on the world's radar of what's really possible. And this is just giving the name and a face to something that already exists. So the thing that exists, we know of, angels per se, higher dimensional beings. Often they're depicted with wings, which is goofy. They obviously wouldn't need wings to fly around in the physical world. Every time, like it's kind of like in the future, many things that we know today, we're just gonna kind of get a chuckle out of because it's ridiculous and goofy. And that's one of those things where I've always looked at them and like that's kind of goofy. And what I have kind of always thought of wings, and this is mostly because I came up with tips and developed tips enough to understand that, and then that bounces back and like tips develop a bit more. Things like the science or quantum physics or any kind of trippy thing I find out about old spiritual scriptures or anything, like I develop tips some more, it goes into that, and then I develop tips more after learning a bunch. Like it all kind of fluctuates around like that. So because of the way that I always looked at tips and understood them, the way that feather stuff works and like the wings idea, it's very specifically, if there is a higher dimensional plane, and like this is the same thing of like all those shamanistic people, channelers, etc., say this too, the same way that we look at the science of the sun backwards, we look at that type of what it is to be a higher existence, like the multiple planes and dimensions of life on like things beyond us and below us and whatever. They all, almost in every single case, they talk about how human life is the place that everyone wants to go to. Like there's a lineup to get here, or different phrases like that, where it's like and it's the same in like Buddhism as well, like just those practices and that understanding of cause and effect. It always leads back to a physical form and a mental form that can interact with each other so that they can purify themselves and really master what it is to be exactly now. And this is something that like I remember talking about this when I was like really young to people in my school and like family and whatever, and it was part of Warrior's Treasure. So I wrote this when I was like 14, 15, 16, that it's like the concept of these dimension things, like higher dimensions, like the only way of transcending time is not to rise up and like transcend dimensions and transcend realms until you're like all of the universe or something, but I always thought about transcending time. And then eventually it was like, oh, people consider time the fourth dimension. Like eventually I learned that. It's like, that makes sense. We're transcend this dimension that would be transcending time as well. So it all fit the bill. But to transcend time, the only way of actually doing it is to limit yourself down to a single moment in it, that there's no association with any other moment except the one you are in, exactly that. So then now there's all these things with the power of now, be here and now. Even with Vipassana, like Vipassana meditation as taught by S. and Goenka in the tradition of Sajji Ubakin, it is specifically about limiting yourself. It's not about branching out and getting the whole scope of everything, but experiencing exactly this moment and nothing else, like within the framework of your existence, with which like you're, it goes as far to say your sensations are you, and your sensations are going to be that mind and matter interacting. And if we were say a higher dimensional being or something that operated in all these planes, eventually the only way of transcending something, going beyond what you are, would be to bring yourself down to a limited faculty, to the point where the only thing that your faculties could pick up was a linear progression of the dimension we call time. Like that would be the case. We would have to get to here, to some form of this type of existence. And with a human life, we have that mind and body interaction. We have control over it to some degree, and like if you go to the subtleties enough, like eventually, volitional action and all this other stuff. But time exists. That's the thing that we are flowing down, and we are not on a single point of it when really we are. The mind isn't with that. So you bring the mind to that, then you've transcended it. So all of these beings that we say go the other direction, no, we would go this direction, and then we would limit ourselves further on this earth in this time until we go past something that way. We go past things in the limiting direction, not the expansion direction. It's contracting that is important. Contracting our energy down to a limited, tiny faculty of existence, tiny moment of time. So these higher dimensional beings, they're not the gods or they're like the angelic figures, the things that are above us and like higher power or anything like that. It actually goes the other way, and this is the way it's always talked about, like through all spiritual cultures and everything. Like there are exceptions and whatever, but we've twisted things around to seem like there's all these things that are more powerful and whatever. But it seems like it makes so much more sense going the other way. And naturally, as a human, like as a living, breathing human being on this earth in this lifetime, we have only this to work with. So this is the thing that needs focusing on, not out there and looking at these higher powers and asking or considering or hoping for anything of that nature. But this is what we have to work with. What can we go from here? And that is where it leads to. So on that note, the the tips bring themselves from those dimensions, whatever it is, limit themselves down to a faculty, to have faculties in a way, to a faculty that is more like mind and matter. I don't know how to say it otherwise. They limit themselves down to a faculty that we call faculties, like humans. This is the humanizing part, but it's not really humanizing. It's more like just bring ourselves to existence as a thing, and to do so you would have some kind of body, like a physical body that the mind can pick up through sense doors, etc. It would look like a form. It probably wouldn't be standing on the ground or whatever. It wouldn't be like some whatever, but there would be some kind of peripheral perspective, like we would have it from our perspective, and not by looking at the thing directly. If we do, it's there too, but it would just be in the proximity of it, which the proximity of a creature that has come from other planes to this one would funnel itself down to something, and the proximity means everywhere. It's not like in the proximity, the physical proximity of it sitting beside me, or the closer I am, the brighter it is. Just being in the proximity, being in an existence where it has funneled itself down to that existence to communicate with you. So it's within your existence. And that kind of concept of proximity, then you would see something in your peripheral, no matter where you're looking, but you would look directly at the figure because that's the thing that is trying to funnel itself down to communicate with. And that direct line of energy would be stronger than anything else. Then you would see what to you would be perceived, and your perspective be lines that go to it, that radiate to it, and not from it, but we would see it as from it, and we would always see it as if it's something behind it. So if, say, I'm facing you and I'm your direct line of focus, it would appear as wings, as this array of things that are funneling out of it, when really it's funneling to it, and not as something that's attached to it, but because this is an energetic body that, like, when we see wings on an angel in any movie or anything like that, we shouldn't be looking at it as, oh, this is an angelic being that's like really powerful or anything like that, and not real wings to fly around. That doesn't make any sense. They don't even use the wings most of the time. But as the energetic lines that have pulled the being down from that higher angelic, celestial, whatever you want to call it, plane, higher spiritual plane, and pushed itself into a tiny funnel to get into this very pinpoint part of its existence as some kind of its version of a moment in time, its version of something that is so highly developed and refined for its existence that it can pop into ours and operate on a level that we can interpret. So we have to be extremely developed to pick up on that as well. If we're not, then we don't even see it. It'll be like some maybe a miracle or something. Like it'll just be this unfathomable stuff, maybe not even in our perception range. So we have to be extremely developed, and it has to be extremely developed in the other way of moving itself down limitation to master that limitation, to become part of something here that we can pick up in our eyes, and as a perpetual kind of permeation of it and in our perspective, then we can pick up on this peripheral energy coming off of it, the thing that is communicating with us, and we would see it as wings or something that's radiating it out. It wouldn't put it in front, and even if it was in front, like, it would be behind, just so we can see. And if you're seeing light hitting at you, like a light bulb coming to you, you don't see the light here. You'll see a light rays out otherwhere. If it is light, it probably wouldn't be light. It would probably be something that's just raying off of it, but off of you as well as that connection to you. So that if you were to look at yourself when you're looking at an angel, you'd probably have that too, but you wouldn't know because you're busy in a communication and like a direct link of energy signals from something that is so usually beyond your perspective. So that is how the tips would operate with a human. To write the prologue to Lantern Valley, for Original Warrior's Treasure, when I was 13 years old, I had to write something with that in mind, without having all those reference points of like the concept of multiple planes and the concept of like how physics works, like anything like that. So this is what I was writing when I was 13, and I wrote the prologue, and I had to make sure that I could actually do something, even like capturing a hint of that, to be able to continue. And that was tips. That was my first first world that I tried to describe slightly. I didn't actually describe it at all in this talk or in the prologue, but just the kind of the place to begin from. Then hopefully I can, as far as describing just the basics of some kind of like one of the just an intro to how I'm going to talk about the worlds, because I didn't even talk about tips, like not even started, but to how I'm going to talk about how these worlds are related or even perceptible by humans. And that's why we're doing, like with Lantern Valley Studios, we're making these treasure tales and stuff in a very human way. Like they were going to be in Lantern Valley, all the Mixmaster stuff, and it was just way too confusing and difficult, and like a really daunting task just to make Lantern Valley itself rise before grand. But a daunting task as well to somehow have these Mixmasters worlds be part of the everyday lives of these people, and the overscape, like the lens that covers the world so they operate through that, and be a game they play, and all this other stuff in the context that they bounce off of is just too much. So now we're doing treasure tales. We've taken that element out of the story, humanized it to extreme extents, to the part where they are the human version of, like, recently we've been working on Moo, and the humanized version of Moo the character, like as a person in Treasure Tales, is a metaphor for the Bagan World tree. Like it's the reverse. The Bagan World tree is not the metaphor for the human story of Moo. It's the other way. We've worked backwards. And Moo, the story about the human, is the tale of what this Bagan tree represents and how the Lantern Valley world operates on it, or like just a concept. And a lot of the concept, even if that one, is the same thing of like he'll talk about things like it's not that you're a part of the world tree or anything like that. It's like this tree that you're standing on, Moo, the tree, this is you. Like you are it, and it's just, that's why you can communicate with that at all. That's why you're a part of nature at all. That's why you can stand anywhere and exist at all, is you are a part of that. You are it. You are in cohesion with it. Like, it's the exact same thing. There's distinction. There's you, there's a tree. There's no separation, and there's a huge distinction between those two, distinction and separation. And Moo goes into that too. It's the same as like the concept of the sun backwards, the same as heartbeat backwards, like all that stuff. It's like what Moo represents is very much a Bagan analogy. That would be another world that is very in line with the same concept of tips. And the very first character, that Tuco, again a humanized name because I just tried to phonetically sound something out that I like, the sound that came to mind when thinking about tips and like the being that I was trying to write about. The very first in the story, in Original Warrior's Treasure, Tips shows up named Tuco, and I wrote like sometimes Tuco, sometimes Tim. I just simplified it to like just a human name for the sake of it. So it's written differently all over the place. And But the very first person or other being that Tuco meets is a pagan named Rokig.